All right, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. If you're joining us for the first time, and we do have quite a few groups joining us for the first time today, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And this month is particularly exciting for us because, as many of our long-standing teachers will know, every February we kick out all the men and spend the entire month celebrating and showcasing incredible women in science and exploration around the globe. And this month, more than ever, in addition to 35 plus broadcasts throughout the month, we also did our epic Women Blaze Trails Festival. Let me just bring this up on the screen, where we did 50 programs in 3 days, 50 programs. So all of those are available at the site. They're also all on our YouTube channel. So whether you want to go to space, to the deep sea, to the Serengeti, Amazon rainforest, wherever you want to go on this planet, we probably had a speaker that talked about it. So do check that out. It's an amazing repertoire and sort of reservoir of incredible people sharing their awesome stories. So today we are on program number 4. We've been with owls. We've been to the Philippines. We just wrapped up with Jessica Diamond, who is a Comlink engineer with the Hearts in the Ice team up in northern Norway. And we are diving in live now with one of my favorite speakers we bring on this broadcast, one of the very first people we brought on back when we started many years ago, Alizé Carrère. And so today she's going to talk about what it's like to be a modern explorer in the 21st century, talking about some of her own expeditions, her own story to get to where she is today as a filmmaker, National Geographic Explorer, and more. And we're also going to bring in a little bit of the story of one of the most iconic and incredible expeditions of all time in human history. Super cool stuff. I'm not going to spoil what that is, so I'm going to turn it over to Alizé. Thank you so much for joining us today, as always, and to take us away.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I am very excited to talk with you all about some of my explorations, some of my voyages around the world. And I'm beaming, just to give you some orientation or context, I am coming to you from Miami, Florida, which is where I currently live right now. I'm doing my PhD at the University of Miami. And I'm studying climate change adaptation and looking at architectural and urban design responses to climate change. So that actually won't be the focus of today's conversation. I'm going to be talking about something very different that I had the really incredible fortune to do a couple years ago that turned into a digital series called Modern Explorer. And I heard from a couple teachers before we got started that some of you have watched the episodes, which is so incredible. I'm so glad that you'll have that context for the show. And then I'm also going to, for those of you who haven't seen it, we will provide the links, and this will be, see this as kind of a teaser of the show, and I'm going to try and give some of the more personal background stories and experiences when we did this voyage, because I think that will be kind of a fun behind the scenes element. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I don't think you're going to see me during the presentation. You'll hear me, of course. I'm going to be showing little snippets and clips from the Modern Explorer series as I talk about the Endurance voyage and Shackleton and various pieces of this. So let me share my screen and let's get started. Okay, so as Jesse said, my name is Alizé Carrère. I'm a National Geographic Explorer, a filmmaker, and a PhD student. I started as a National Geographic Explorer back in 2013 when I got a grant to go to Madagascar, where I was doing research on human adaptations to very severe deforestation. And I'll start by saying that I am a social scientist, so a lot of my work actually centers around people and science. And I think that this is an area, when we think of science, I think we automatically often go to the natural sciences, but there is an incredibly robust world out there in the social sciences, looking at how people interact with the world around them, what impacts and consequences our behaviors have on the natural world. And for me, that was really that's what drew me to science, was actually the human dimension. And my work, as I'm going to explore, really gets at that through the various filmmaking projects I've done, through my actual research over the last several years, whether that was during my master's degree or now during my PhD. So I am a social scientist by training. I tend to draw mostly from anthropology and sociology in terms of my methods. But of course, that also means that I get to do a lot of things around, with nature and in the natural world, like be with these king penguins on the screen that you're seeing from this selfie that I took at Gold Bay Harbor on South Georgia Island. So let me just give you guys a little bit of a background about who I am, where I came from, just to set this up. I'm originally from Ithaca, New York, in upstate New York. I am half French, half American. My father is from the south of France. My mom's American, and I born and raised in Ithaca, but then I went up to McGill University in Canada for my undergraduate degree and my master's degree, and spent a wonderful 5 years north of the border. And now I am down in very sunny Miami on the absolute other end of the continent. And I am really enjoying being here. Certainly, I know it's been a rough winter. My family and everybody up in the upstate area of the New York region that I'm from has been buried under a lot of snow. So that's where I'm from. And this is the house that I grew up in. So this image that you're seeing on the left is my home. And if you perhaps can very clearly see, there's a very large 300-year-old oak tree growing right through the front of our porch. My dad and mom built this house. It was originally a dirt floor house with an outhouse as a bathroom when they purchased it. And this tree was right in front of the house. The porch and everything wasn't there yet. And they wanted to expand the house, but they didn't want to cut down the tree. So they actually built the house around the tree. And my father was a woodworker. He had a company for many years building wood homes, very kind of solar homes, passive homes. And so our house was right on the edge of Cayuga Lake, which is one of the Finger Lakes. And this was a really unique place to grow up as a kid, as you can imagine, because it really felt like the natural world was literally a part of our home. And I often joke that the tree was kind of like a fifth family member. It was my mom, my sister, myself, and my father. And the tree was very much a living, breathing part of our house. And we'd always have to carve away every few years more of our front porch to accommodate it as it grew, and just deal with all the leaves. I feel like I never want to pick up a rake again ever in my life. It was a huge family affair every fall to rake the leaves, because we would just be buried under a layer of golden foliage from this house. But the reason I want to share this with you is that this home was really instrumental for me in guiding my trajectory as an explorer and what it is that I do today, because I today look at how people respond to global climate change and how different changes around them at a landscape level are affecting their lives and what they do to adapt. And on a much, much, much smaller scale, that was really very central to my upbringing as a kid. We were constantly learning to live in balance with this tree, because it was such a huge part of our life and our house, and carpenter ants and squirrels and leaves, and watching for snow in the winter if the snow would accumulate on the branches and get too heavy and then crash down into our living room. There were all these different elements of our house that were very whimsical, but also it was a very high maintenance, and kind of we all had to be on high alert all the time with this home, making sure that we were safe. But nonetheless, that sort of anecdotal, but I want to just bring that up as a point, because I think it's a fun and interesting part of my journey, certainly as I've gone out into the world and taken an interest in the sciences, and specifically now, as I said, the social sciences. This was a photo. This is an image of drawing from my childhood art box that we found not that long ago, when I must have been about 6 years old. And tree houses for us were just completely normal. We just thought everybody lived in tree houses, and that was just part of the normal fabric of life in America. And we had my sister and I constantly drew tree houses, because that was all we knew. And not that our house was suspended in the trees quite like this, but this kind of blending of nature and society, and nature and humans that line was very kind of blurry for us in a really wonderful way, I would say. So I got my grant in 2013 from the National Geographic Society. At the time, it was called the National Geographic Young Explorer Program. It's now called the National Geographic Early Career Grant Program. And I had applied for a grant to study how farmers in Madagascar were dealing with severe deforestation. This was an incredible expedition. It was my very first field expedition that I was leading. I had a wonderful local agricultural journalist who I worked with from Madagascar. She and I, of course, these lemurs that you're seeing on my shoulders are what a lot of us think of when we think of Madagascar. These are black and white ruffed lemurs. And these were, by the way, these would never be this comfortable with humans like this. This was because we were at an animal sanctuary where these were lemurs that had been taken as babies and introduced into the exotic pet trade. And now they were being rehabilitated to try and learn to live back in nature, having been retrieved from that market. And they unfortunately will never be fully wild again, but they can at least roam on this forested area freely but they, of course, are quite used to humans. But I actually wasn't there to study the lemurs, even though that's sort of the mascot that we associate with Madagascar. I was actually there to look at trees or the lack thereof, and the deforestation taking place across the island. So as you can see here in this image, that was my field assistant Andu on my right there in that image, and she and I basically rode dirt bikes for 3 months, traipsing around through the highlands of Madagascar, which is what you're seeing in this picture, the larger picture here. And this area is, as you can clearly see, terribly deforested. There's been lots of slash and burn agriculture and just general cutting and burning of trees for various reasons, for the exotic wood market, for charcoal production, for, as I mentioned, slash and burn agriculture. But the result of all of that is that the deforestation has taken not only the trees that are above ground off of course, like removing the tree matter, but also all of the root systems underground that hold the soil together. And it creates these massive erosional gullies that you're seeing on the screen here, these very large kind of like inverse teardrop looking formations that are called lavaca, which in the Malagasy language literally translates to the word hole. So these were, the farmers were seeing these very large holes emerging in the hillsides because of the lack of trees, because the soil was very susceptible to erosion, and it would create these big, basically kind of landslide events, these erosional events. And my research was asking farmers, how are you living with this? How are you adapting to these incredibly significant landscape features across the hillsides, which were by every measure very, very destructive. But my research question was posing this idea that, are there farmers who are benefiting from these? And the reason that was my research question is because we had heard like whisperings on the ground that was the case. And I thought that was so improbable, like just completely, how could that be the case, that you could do something positive with these formations? And we spent 3 months basically doing ethnographic research, which is essentially going and asking farmers, interviewing them, doing structured or semi-structured interviews, and understanding their farming practices to try and capture a story about how life was being lived in response to this deforestation. So it was a really fascinating study. We learned a lot about how farmers are indeed utilizing some of these formations as a means to funnel water down the lavaca and to the ground where they would plant their crops at the base or at the outflow of the lavaca. So it was sort of like a natural effect, funneling effect of water. I actually spoke about this, Jesse at the top of the presentation just now mentioned the Women Blaze Trails event that they did. I spoke about this in much more detail. I would encourage all of you, if you're interested to learn more about this, to refer to that. I have lots of resources about my work in Madagascar, and you're more than welcome to look into that in more detail. I've spoken about it a lot, and I wanted to focus on something a little bit different today. So I'm not going to go into too much more detail, but I do encourage you to check that out when you have a chance, if you'd like to know more about the lavaca and what the farmers are doing. That project was really a huge path changer for me, because it set me on a journey around the world to look at how other people around the world were adapting to different environmental or landscape changes occurring these were stories that just weren't being told because they were either in very remote places or just stories that didn't have a megaphone to even get the information out. And I was really intrigued by this term adaptation and what it means for communities and people who are living with climate change and who are living with environmental destruction. What does it look like to adapt, and what are those stories? And so that's where my filmmaking journey started, was going, in addition to doing my field work and my research on these different places, capturing their stories visually so that they could be told in a format that's useful for all of you tuning in classrooms, for educators, for students, to see what these stories are like on the ground. Like, what does it look like to live on the front lines of some type of a climate change related issue? Whether that's, here in the top left, I went to Bangladesh to look at sea level rise, and how farmers there are adapting to sea level rise by building floating gardens. Went to Vanuatu, this is top right corner, to look at coral reef degradation and how fishermen are adapting to coral reefs being eaten by a predatory starfish. Then we went to Ladakh, which is up in northern India, to look at Himalayan glacial melt and the consequences that's having for communities and villages there that depend on glacial melt for their water and irrigating their crops. And then last but not least, we spent some time in the United States looking at in Kentucky, rather, on the Mississippi River, we got to talk to fishermen coping with the Asian carp crisis and how they are adapting and what they are doing with these very prolific fish. So collectively, the Madagascar grant that I got from National Geographic really kickstarted this journey about what does adaptation look like around the world. And I am super excited. I can't quite share the details just yet, but these short films will soon be coming out online. I will put a link at the end to my website. Please tune in for that. I will absolutely let you all know when and where on my social media and on my website where these will be available. They're going to be short, between 12 and 15 minutes each, and they cover different topics around climate change and climate change adaptation that would certainly be really important, I think, for the next generation to be aware of and learn how people are living with these realities in a way that can get you inspired to help be a part of the solutions. So it's called Adaptation. I will definitely put more information at the end of the talk about that, because later this year you will all be able to access those, which I'm super excited about. It's been a 7-year project in the making, and I am so excited that it is finally going to see the light of day toward the end of this year. But as I said, that is actually not, and none of that is actually why I'm here to talk to you today. What I want to focus on today is something called Modern Explorer, which, as I mentioned earlier, is an online educational series in partnership with Lindblad Expeditions and National Geographic Education. I used to work for Lindblad Expeditions as a itinerary developer and also an expedition leader aboard the National Geographic Orion, which I will show you in a moment. But this was a project that we did on exploration today and what that means. And I think for so many of you perhaps tuning in, especially some of you who are younger, the idea of an explorer and what does that even mean? Who is an explorer? Like, well, I mean, I have the title a National Geographic Explorer, but does our world feel very mapped and trodden? How do we explore today when we feel like every square inch of the planet is in some way? We know, we've got satellites and we have every sensor imaginable on this planet to know what's happening. How do we explore? And what did that look like previously versus today? So that is the premise of Modern Explorer. In its short form, Lindblad Expeditions supported the trip by way of my, actually getting us down to South Georgia and the Falkland Islands, which is where the first season is of the series. We hope this was released, just so you all know, this series was released right at the beginning of COVID. Our plan was, and I hope still is, once the world comes back online a bit more, to continue this series and in other seasons travel to other locations and look at past explorers based on different locations that Lindblad goes. And this, again, in partnership with Nat Geo Education, because I think this is a really powerful and important topic to be discussing, in today's day and age when we look at exploration and places for people to go, and how do we enrich our knowledge? How do we deepen our knowledge on things, knowing that, the tools are very different to us today. The technology is very different. And so Modern Explorer tries to look at some of these themes in relation to one specific geography in this first episode. That geography is South Georgia and the Falkland Islands, which are, to this day, probably one of the most spectacular, incredible, amazing, unbelievable. I mean, you could give any number of words to describe it, but truly one of the most magnificent places I have ever had the privilege to go. And part of that, South Georgia especially, South Georgia is sometimes referred to as the Serengeti of the South, because it's just so, the wildlife there, after, so long of not being exploited by humans, is now very, not fearful of humans, because there aren't people that live there, save for, some very small communities, not even communities, like kind of a little village where I'm going to show you where that was. But previously this island was really just an absolute slaughterhouse for animals that lived here because of different uses of whale and penguin and seal blubber during the late 1800s. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this journey, what it was like being there, and I'd love to get questions from you all at the end. These are king penguins behind me, as you can see, and like I said, they were totally unfazed by my presence because they are not used to humans there, and they don't have the reaction to be fearful of us. So it's really an amazing experience to stand alongside a king penguin colony and see them kind of curiously look you in the eye while you're there. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about who my co-host is in this show. I, obviously as a young woman in STEM, I'm I'm exploring out there in the world. I'm a National Geographic Explorer, but my co-host for the show is a gentleman named Tom Ritchie, who has been traveling with Lindblad expeditions and National Geographic for decades. We figured out that he has probably been to Antarctica more times than any other person on Earth. And I know that sounds like currently living, and I know that sounds like a crazy statement, but this guy has been working for Lindblad expeditions for almost 40 years and has been going to Antarctica 3 to 4 times a year on Lindblad voyages, which, were bringing ordinary citizens down there. And his experiences, he's traveled all around the world, but he is an absolute wealth of knowledge, and he is sort of my guide on this journey as a modern explorer, because he represents a different generation and a different kind of the old guard of explorers back in his era, and now I'm sort of as somebody else starting to move around these landscapes. What does that look like, and what does exploration mean to me? So this is Tom, as I mentioned, very well, he's just hilarious. I don't know how else to describe him. He's a very funny dude. And he, as I said, has been traveling around the world for 40 years, working as a naturalist, and previously expedition leader for Lindblad. And he is so knowledgeable about so many different parts of the world, but that he becomes sort of my mentor, or, guide, if you will, on the voyage. So I want to start by just giving you a teaser of the intro, and then I'm going to get into the endurance part.
We're getting an up-close look at some of the cutest animals on the planet, and some of the smelliest. I'm Alizé Carrère, an environmental anthropologist and National Geographic Explorer. This is my friend Tom Ritchie, a naturalist who spent decades in the field. Together, we'll discover what it means to be a modern explorer.
Okay, so one of the things that's amazing about Tom is that he lives not that far from me here in Florida. So he lives just up north, maybe about a 3 or 4 hour drive. And he has the most unbelievable, if you watch the series, you guys are going to see his collection, like he calls it his cabinet of wonders. It is an extraordinary collection of artifacts that he has collected from around the world, from his 40 years of working on the Lindblad National Geographic vessels, taking people around the world to see and explore and understand different cultures and communities and geographies on our planet. And I hope you'll get a chance to look at that, because you will see just what an unbelievable collection. And I should say, like, that's obviously something I would never start today, or many people wouldn't start today, because we know a lot more about, taking artifacts from different places, and that those artifacts belong, where they should stay where they were found, and with the cultures and communities within which they were, where they originated from. But it's a really interesting look at how exploration has changed from an era of collecting artifacts to today documenting. And today, my biggest device in the field happens to be my phone. I use my iPhone for all kinds of things. I mean, that would be just inconceivable to Tom, even 20 years ago. So whether it's photography, GPS, recording interviews, I mean, my phone, and that's sort of, as you're seeing on the screen here, is my main tool as an explorer today in many instances, certainly with my particular form of research. But the person I want to talk about today, who is sort of the other figure that features in this season, is a gentleman by the name of Ernest Shackleton, who was an Anglo-Irish explorer. He was born in 1874 in Ireland and lived until 1922. And this is a man who, if there is a word for, if there's a definition of explorer, I mean, he meets all the criteria, because for so many different reasons, but the world that he was living in at the time, and the types of discoveries that were taking place and expeditions that were occurring, were absolutely the first of their kind in so many instances. And so we use Ernest Shackleton's story, traveling down to South Georgia, and ultimately his attempts to make it across Antarctica, as the kind of framework for modern explorer, where we look at different generations, right? So we're starting with Ernest Shackleton, we to Tom, and then to myself in the 21st century. But let's just talk about Ernest Shackleton for a second, because it's probably one of the most unbelievable stories of exploration that you could kind of dream up. I mean, it's just so unimaginable, actually, what took place. So some of you might be familiar with this already, but for those of you who aren't, we talk about this in, I believe it's we touch on it in the beginning, but it's really more the last episode of the series, if I'm not mistaken, that really goes into the Endurance. So this is the ship, the Endurance, that Shackleton and his crew were on that in the year 1914 when they took off from South Georgia. So as you guys saw, where I was with Tom, we were on South Georgia Island. We had left from Ushuaia on the down here, made the crossing. We actually went to the Falkland Islands first and then to South Georgia. So they were going to be doing what was called the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. And I'm just going to walk you through what their intended journey was, because ultimately this completely failed. And that's what's so fascinating about it, is because despite the failure, they actually miraculously made it through, or made it out alive. I think that should be the better way to put it. So they were going to leave South Georgia. They were going to cross over, they kind of move along this way, and they were going to come to Antarctica here, and they were going to mount sort of a foot expedition across Antarctica through the South Pole, and then they were going to meet another team, the Ross Sea team, and they were then going to take the Aurora, which was another ship, and take it across down to here in New Zealand. Sorry, this pink line here. This was where the Aurora would come up, and there were folks that were setting up depots, like supply depots along here, so that when the men were crossing, that they would have some supplies for this last portion. So this was going to be the first trip of its kind. But as I said, this went terribly wrong. What ended up happening was they only made it to about here, and their ship got stuck in pack ice that was incredibly dense and thick, and it ultimately forced them to do this journey right here. So it turned into a giant circle, as you're going to see. This is basically what ended up happening. And I'm going to walk you through some of that version of the expedition, just to give you some orientation. Here's South Georgia Island, that is kind of in like a crescent shape. And this was what their situation was in 1914 when they took off from South Georgia and made it on their way through the Weddell Sea down to on their way to Antarctica. So let me just play a segment from the very first chapter of this journey that is featured in the Modern Explorer series.
Shackleton and his 27-man crew set off from South Georgia to Antarctica. But before they got to the continent, their boat, the Endurance, was trapped in an ice pack. After 9 months of struggling to get free, they still failed. The ice pack shifted and their boat sank. That really should have been the end of it. Their expedition was over and they were sure to die. But that's not where the story ends. So let's put another 30 seconds on the clock. The crew made camp on the ice and drifted on the floe for 6 months. Eventually, they were able to make a break for land using 3 dinky lifeboats. They were starved, frostbitten, and exhausted, yet somehow they all made landfall here on Elephant Island. But Tom and I aren't on Elephant Island. We're on South Georgia, which is where the crew of the Endurance needed to get if they were going to be rescued. So let's put another 30 seconds on the clock to wrap up this story. It'll be the last time I cheat and add time. See, back in 1916, there were whaling stations on South Georgia that could mount a rescue to Elephant Island, if only they knew there were men stranded there who needed saving. So Shackleton handpicked 5 men to join him on an 800-mile journey. They set sail on the open ocean using the most intact lifeboat they had. It was a straight shot, and if they missed it, there was no second chance. Miraculously, they stayed on course, and Shackleton and his crew marooned themselves here on the southern coast of South Georgia. But they found themselves on the wrong side of the island.
Okay, so let's just talk this through for a second, because this is like so unimaginable what these guys did. So here's that voyage that I just walked through in my voiceover on that video. So basically, as I said, for 9 months they were just drifting. I mean, think about that. 9 months with zero contact with the outside world. Drifting, and then finally it gets so dense that the ice is so powerful, it just crushes their ship, and then their ship sinks. And so that's somewhere around here. Then they are floating, the crew, they set up tents in a kind of temporary camp of sorts, and for another 6 months kind of drift along on the ice pack, and then they finally get to Elephant Island. And then Shackleton, with a few of his men, take one of the very kind of last intact lifeboats they have, and he makes a crossing. What he knew that there were whaling stations on South Georgia, which was where he was going to be able to reach somebody to say, hey, I have men that are stranded on Elephant Island. You need to come back. You need to help us mount a rescue. I can't express enough how unimaginably difficult it would have even been to make this journey on a little teeny lifeboat. This was like finding a needle in a haystack. Like the opportunity for them to get blown off course or shot into a different direction or miss with they had a sextant, which is a tool that they would navigate with. But this was the fact alone that they made it on this one little lifeboat that was just through incredibly rough seas all the way to South Georgia to get to this whaling station is in itself just an absolutely astonishing feat. So that's the journey. That just so you know, like where we're leaving off with this story is that all of Shackleton's crew are stuck on Elephant Island, and then they are making their way to go try and catch somebody at the whaling station. But as I mentioned in my story, they arrived on the wrong side of the island. So the whaling station was over here and they arrived here. Now that wouldn't seem like a crazy expedition, right? You're like, okay, well, let's just walk across the island. That was going to be a transit that Shackleton had to do with his men. They were, as I said, exhausted, barely surviving on, no food, very little, it was just like unimaginably difficult circumstances. And they arrived on one side when they actually made landfall and had to cross South Georgia to get to the whaling station. And this is what South Georgia looks like. So imagine these guys showing up, having barely slept, starved almost to zero fat on their bodies, frostbitten, nauseous after over a year of not having contact with other humans. And they arrive on the shores of this very rugged island, and they have to cross this island, which, by the way, had never, ever been done before. So that's what's, and this already, he was like trying to just make the crossing of South Georgia was a first in its own right. Now, today, there's a lot of things we would use to make a trek across a landscape like this. We would use crampons, we would use GPS, we would use tents, we would have, reflective sunglasses and first aid kits and ropes and things like that, because that is what, on South Georgia. In fact, there are some folks who have done these different expeditions on South Georgia, and this is the type of gear you would absolutely require for something like that. Shackleton and his men had none of that. They were in battered clothing. They were wet. They were, had pretty much absolutely none of these things. All they had was rope, one lantern, screws from his lifeboat, and a pick, like a hammer pick. That was all they had to make a crossing that was going to take basically a day and a half. And now I have to say, when Tom and I went down here, we got to be on the very luxurious National Geographic Explorer, which was, of course, a much cushier experience than what obviously Shackleton and his men went through. But Tom and I did a portion of this hike, the last portion of it, where Shackleton would have come down the edge of the mountain and seen down onto the whaling station. We were there at the time in summer. At the time was summer for this region. So this is not what it looked like when Shackleton and his men were there. It was covered in ice and snow. And this was really quite even just what Tom and I did, it was about a 5-hour hike, was really treacherous. And so it's pretty amazing to think about what this would have been like for them. And I'm getting tight on time here, so I'm going to try and wrap this up. But basically, this moment in the video, I want to just mention how incredible this experience was for me personally. I felt like I just got chills on going up and down my spine when we descended to the ruins of what is now the Stromness Bay whaling station. Of course, this doesn't exist anymore, but these whaling stations were hugely functional and productive in their time when people were just hauling. I mean, this bay was just a bloodbath. They would pull in huge whales, elephant seals, everything like that, kill them and boil down their blubber to be used for various products. And so this whaling station, you have to remember, right where Tom and I are walking, this was exactly where Shackleton basically would have walked down. And he had been gone for over a year. Everybody thought he was dead. They thought the crew was dead. Nobody had heard anything from him. And he descended down. And by the time he and his men finally made it across the island, which alone they could have completely perished from that journey itself, after they made the hike, Shackleton heard the 8 o'clock whistle blow, which was calling all the men to work at the whaling station. And he came down this valley that Tom and I walked down, and arrived down there, and everybody they thought it was like a ghost. Like, who is this person? And he said, "Sir, I'm Sir Ernest Shackleton. I have my men. Everybody is still alive. They're on Elephant Island." And I mean, it just gives me chills thinking about it. You can just imagine what these people, like, everybody thought he was dead. It was like he came with a beard. He was completely covered in dirt. And I mean, he must have just looked completely unrecognizable to people. And that ultimately was how he was able to rescue his crew on Elephant Island. And the fact that every single one of his men, 4 months, could you imagine not knowing if your leader was going to return? For 4 months, they had to keep up morale. They were trying to survive day to day by catching different wildlife to eat, anything that they could, but not ever having the assurance, not having any cell phone, GPS, nothing to be able to know if their leader was going to come back. And the remarkable part about this story is that, of course, Shackleton did, and they were able to mount a rescue to pick him up. So I'll just share this last clip.
On Elephant Island, the crew of the Endurance had been keeping lookout every day, hopeful for Shackleton's return. But days turned to weeks. After 4 months of waiting, just as all hope was lost, a lookout spotted a ship on the horizon. The men built a smoke signal to draw its attention, and on August 30th, 1916, Shackleton returned in a tugboat to rescue his crew. The expedition was finally over. They never made it to Antarctica, but because of Shackleton's leadership, every man survived.
So it is really just an absolutely astonishing journey. And if all of you are interested in learning more about it, there's a wonderful book, The Endurance, but there's lots of other resources online. And I think for me, what was so powerful about being able to retrace some of this journey was to see how unbelievable, being able to be a part of the terrain and experiencing it in what were arguably much, much more favorable conditions than what Shackleton and his men had to go through. Obviously, I mean, of course, never mind even the fact that we were, we came on a nice ship, but just even the fact that we were there when there wasn't as much ice and snow, just the crossing alone when they had to walk across the island. Shackleton, his men were so exhausted, and his leadership abilities were so remarkable that, one of his men said, "I have to sleep. I'm exhausted. I need to go to sleep." And he knew that if his men on that 36-hour crossing from one side of the island to the whaling station, he knew that if they fell asleep for too long, that would, it would be horrible. So he let them, he would watch until the minute that they fell asleep, and then he would wake them up again and say, "You've been sleeping for so long. You're so rested. Let's go." I mean, it's a really, if you think, there's so much research that's been done on kind of his mental leadership skills and how he was able to motivate and keep morale up under such unbelievably difficult circumstances. And it's really remarkable when we think about that today. So this is all that's left of the whaling station. And in episode 8 of the series, we go here, and you can see this is an old whaling vessel. This is where the harpoon was, where they would throw grenades off the top to kill the whales. They would pull them ashore up here. This is where they would boil down the blubber. It's a ghost. I mean, it's just a rusted ghost town, but this was in its heyday a very, very productive bay for producing for extracting products from different animals. And I think that the key part of this story is that, exploration back then was defined by exploitation. And today it's the complete opposite. We bring explorers and we bring, citizens and different folks around the world to these places now for conservation, and how exploration has changed from some of those more perhaps colonial aspects or imperial aspects that are now looking toward how do we embrace and conserve these very precious landscapes and wildlife and species that we have. And this is a super stark reminder of that. And there were so many species that were basically almost hunted to the brink of extinction. And so many of them have now rebounded today. And you will learn a lot more about that in some of these episodes. This is a giant whale bone this is this is a photo from when we were there, so you can just see the ruins and remains of, almost a century later, what's still left there. So we go through this very dark history, but we also talk about the revival and all of the incredible animals like the elephant seals that have come back from really serious destruction and are now completely populating these shorelines. Of course, the king penguins, which I know a lot of people are very passionate about. We talk a lot about their life and what they're facing now with climate change and how they are living with that. I'm not going to play any of these because we're short on time. And ultimately, this is also where Ernest Shackleton himself was buried. He died of a heart attack here on South Georgia in 1922. And Tom and I actually had a chance to visit his grave. It was really a very special and kind of poignant moment to culminate the voyage. So that's the series. You have all of the episodes here. As I mentioned, 9 episodes. It really kind of weaves in between stories of exploration and also wildlife and the different creatures and inhabitants of these areas. And our hope is that we will do future seasons as well of Modern Explorer, where we look at perhaps Charles Darwin in the Galapagos and see how, well, what does that look like today versus the explorers of, Darwin's day, and or Teddy Roosevelt in the Amazon, or, James Cook in Alaska. Like, there's lots of different places that we can go to keep this theme of like, what does exploration look like today? How do we continue to explore deeper in some of the areas? It might look very different from the days of Ernest Shackleton. We're not doing the first crossing necessarily of an untraversed landscape, but we are absolutely diving deeper into the science behind these different issues and finding ways of exploring by different means. And so that, for me, being focused on very personal, human, intimate relationships with nature. I mean, my explorations look very different, of course, but nonetheless are explorations. So each episode is, just to give you a little background, 47 minutes. They can be watched as standalone pieces or a single topic. It's about an hour if you watch them all back to back. And that is Tom and I having a blast on this trip. And he's a total hoot, and I hope you will all get a chance to enjoy. So I'm going to end with this question. I would actually really love to hear, I know we're short on time, but I would love to throw this out to all of you and ask, what does exploration today mean to you? Is it something that feels attainable? Is it accessible? Is it, I have my own answer to this question as a young woman in this field in a very different setting. But I would really love to hear some other thoughts about that from all of you. So I will end my slide and kick it back to the screen so I can hear from some of you guys.
Wonderful. So we are really close, so we're near the end of the actual broadcast. We're going to go, that's okay. We're going to go with 10 minutes long and try and get a question from every one of our live classes. If you do have to go, you can email me questions later and I'll get them to Alizé. If you guys want to answer her question in the chat bar on YouTube, please do. And we'd love to take some questions from there. I'm going to start with Mr. Atkinson's class. They're joining us in Virginia. They're our only group with a full class in class right now, which is pretty exciting.
Oh, great.
Mr. Atkinson, if you guys want to come in, go for it for a question.
All right.
Hi.
Got a couple questions one question from the kids, but it's 2 parts. They want to know, when did you first figure out what it was exactly you wanted to do in life and what you needed to get there? And what's it like being a woman in a field predominantly filled with men?
Yeah, fantastic questions. Can I ask Mr. Atkinson, what age group is your class?
They're 9th graders. They're from, 10th graders. 10th graders this time. It reminded me real quick.
Okay.
From, I guess, 15 to 17.
Perfect. No, well, that is the exact, you guys are all the exact age that I was when I sort of started to figure out what I wanted to do. I took AP Environmental Science when I was a junior in high school, and which doesn't even feel like that long ago, but I guess it was a few years ago now. And that class for me was really powerful because I was never a super strong science student necessarily. I mean, that wasn't where I thrived. I always really enjoyed science, but I had a hard time connecting it to our day-to-day world. And I felt like it was something that was behind a microscope or in a lab bench and AP Environmental Science opened my eyes to, as I said, the social sciences and how humans were so intimately connected to the natural world. And so I can just say that I know that interdisciplinary environmental science research and like environmental studies as a major is becoming very popular. So those of you who are in high school right now, I would encourage you to look at that path. It's a really wonderful space for if you're not entirely certain you know what you want to do. I did my undergraduate degree in environmental sciences, and I would do nothing differently if I had to do it all over again, because I felt like I got such a wonderful understanding of the natural world in connection to humans. I mean, we can't separate those two things anymore. We are so much a part of the problems that we have wrought upon ourselves on this planet, but also how we're going to address create solutions. So that was really, it was 11th grade. It was my junior year when I took APES. And then as far as being a woman in this field, I feel very lucky that there were so many women that came before me that blazed these trails. And as much as I have been able to move very freely about doing what I'm doing, that was not all groundwork that I had to lay myself. And for the most part, especially because I am in the social sciences, it's a very open space for women. And I feel like I've had a very positive experience. I mean, obviously in some of the stuff that I was doing, like some of the expedition leading and things like that, that is not so much the case. But I think the key to I have just stayed very true to what it is that I love. And I try to, if there are people who have judgments about me doing whatever it is that I'm doing, or if that feels like it's not, that I don't fit the mold, which of course I've received those criticisms before, you have to do your best to put it away. And obviously the internet is an unkind place these days. There are lots of trolls and people who will come up with every reason to discredit and discount who you are and what you're doing. But you almost kind of have to accept that that's a part of it in some way and put it out, because you can't let that interfere with your passions. And I learned that early on. And as I said, I wasn't entirely just my doing. There were many women before me who set a precedent for that.
I think that's a very beautiful and thoughtful answer. So thank you for that, Alizé. For our first question today, I wanted to note too, we've got 7 other full classes joining on YouTube. So it's like well over 250 kids from, I think, 8 to 2 provinces, which is pretty exciting. And our one person who answered what a modern explorer means to them so far was Libby in Auburn, Alabama. And she said it means learning and having fun, which I think is a very positive message. Oh, so that's pretty good.
True. Libby, that is so true. And I think that that's one of the things that I have found to be like, I love what I do. And that has to also, like, that's part of the success factor, I think, in life in general. Like, I know it sounds trite, but you have to love what you do. And I think that if you are able to have fun while doing these types of travels or research, it is so key to the definition today.
So way to go, Libby. You won the day with your answer. Let's head to Notre Dame High School in Belmont, California. We've got some grade 12 students there. So Mr. Gerard's class, if you want to unmute your mic, come on in. And
there we go. All right. Hi, this is awesome. Hi. That was a great answer as well. Notre Dame is an all-girls school, and my class is an AP biology class. I'm getting ready to go to college next year, so really interested in finding their passions. And they have great questions. One is, what's it like to work or go on expeditions with scientists and explorers that you've never really met before? Is it difficult to build trust, or does the common connection of the project and love for nature bring you together?
Oh my gosh, that is such a good question. I think that the way I want to answer this is that because I think that the passion for the research, I guess it depends on the project, but in my experience, I have had very positive versions of, like, if I had to think about this question, it's been very positive for me. And I think that some of that has to do with the fact that a lot of my research is focused on people. And so it is naturally just kind of built into the equation that you have to be a team player, you have to be collaborative, you have to be open, you have to listen. I mean, listening is such a huge part of my job, and doing research where you take in diverse perspectives. So I would say that maybe that comes a little more naturally to some of the work that I personally do in the social sciences. I know that may not be the case everywhere, but the teams, I will say the other thing, in addition to doing my scientific research, I said I do films. I have learned so much in my filmmaking from my training in anthropology and kind of the social sciences, because so much of filmmaking is building trust with your protagonists, with your characters. If I go to Bangladesh to tell a story about how farmers are adapting to climate change, I've never met them before, but you have to, before you start rolling the cameras, before you start if you were a scientist, taking instruments out and collecting information, you have to, at a bare minimum, create some semblance of trust. And that to me has been the most rewarding part of this work, is that it allows for this work really allows for the human aspect to shine. And I carry that with me no matter where I go. I think it's one of the most important parts of doing good scientific research today.
Yeah, I think it's, again, a beautiful message, and I'm really excited for our classes to see your videos. The number one question we're getting in YouTube chat, at least, is how they can see more of these videos, how they can check these out. So we will link to all that. Alizé has a beautiful website which links to a lot of these things.
Yes.
The issues very prominent on. So there's lots of ways to check these things out when you're done this broadcast, I promise. And
one more thing I want to say, I don't know if you guys, if any of you guys are familiar with the Crash Course series. I am the host for the new Crash Course Geography series on YouTube. The Green Brothers, I know many people know them and use them in high school and middle school. We're looking at it's both a physical and human geography series. So I will, if you just Google Crash Course Geography, you'll see we're sending out weekly episodes. It's going to be going on for the next year. So there's tons of content about to come out. We have 8 episodes, I think, up online right now. And every week you'll get a new episode from us. So that's another thing that is tied to all of this: exploring the world, geography, environmental science, anthropology. It's kind of all, in my world, kind of come together in a nice package. So do tune into that too.
Very, very cool. You just do it all, don't you? There's no stopping for Alizé. Just constantly some cool stuff coming out all the time. So check those out. Our teachers in the background underneath, sort of in the background, are very excited about that. So they obviously know about that work, and that's awesome, guys. All right, we're getting really, really close to having classes have to leave for the next period. So I want to see if we can whip through these next few questions, see if we can get one per class. Mr. LaVogue, North Palm Beach, Florida, with grade 3s today. Do you have a question for us? Come on in.
Hi.
Hi, how you doing? I'm about halfway between you and Tom.
Okay.
In North Palm. I have 65 third graders with us.
Oh, my goodness.
And Zachary wants to know, with all of your travels and adventures, have you ever been in a dangerous situation?
Great question. I have, but it was mitigated. We were able to manage it. Basically, I was in Madagascar, and this is kind of an interesting story given the reality that we're all living right now. But there was a bubonic plague outbreak, which some people, and certainly myself at the time, I didn't even realize that was still something that, frankly, I didn't realize that still even existed. But there are small pockets around the world where the bubonic plague can erupt, and Madagascar over the last decade has actually been one of the places where that has happened the most. And there was a village that I was planning to travel to that was exactly where the outbreak was happening, and it had made national headlines. And I had some research to do in that particular village, but this is where modern medicine comes in. The bubonic plague is no longer deadly to us because we have antibiotics, penicillin. We can absolutely cure that. So I took a prophylactic dose of medication, and I was able to continue my work. Obviously, they quickly quarantined and took the strict measures that needed to be taken. But it was a little touch and go there for a minute. We were quite concerned about it initially, and then we were able to, I would say medicine to the rescue there.
I think you're the first person ever to mention bubonic plague in one of your programs. Danger is always something the teachers are really keen on. So
yeah,
good job dodging that bullet. And again, if you want to see more on Alizé's work in Madagascar, check out the Women Blaze Trails program we've done with her. In fact, you can type her name into our YouTube chat bar. We've done a lot of talks with her on Madagascar before. It's a really special place that we love to cover here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. Let's head to Simcoe, Muskoka counties. Mr. Atkinson, if you have a question for us, come on.
Okay, hello. Thank you very much. We actually started watching your crash course yesterday. So
fantastic.
It was awesome. I have a question from one of my virtual students, Wyatt, who will patch in right now and ask it.
Cool.
Wyatt.
What is the process to get a grant from National Geographic to become an explorer?
Excellent question. I'm so glad you asked that, Wyatt, because I was going to mention something about that. When you guys are all 18, any of you could, in theory, apply for one of these grants. I was 20. The grant opens up for 18 and beyond. If you search National Geographic grants in Google, you will come to their grant page, and you will see some of the different programs and types of projects that they support. One of the things that I would suggest, and I suggest this often to high school students, when you guys do get to college, if you head on to, when you get into undergrad, use your professors. Like your professors are your best friends. And I know it can be a bit intimidating initially when you get into sometimes very large classes. Seek them out, talk to them. Your professors are often doing really interesting research. And I bring this example up because it was my geography professor when I was at McGill University during my undergrad, who had been doing that research in Madagascar. And he was doing something else there. And it was in our class that he said, we've been hearing that farmers are potentially using these landscape formations in some kind of a positive way. And I said, it just never left my mind. And so when I found the National Geographic grant, I reached out to him. I sent him an email and I said, I took your class last year. I'm an environmental science major, and I want to apply for a grant to do research on, kind of pick up where he left off on this research topic. And he said, absolutely. He helped review my application. He helped me, he wrote my letter of recommendation. So your professors are such a wealth of knowledge, and I strongly encourage you to use them. Look at their profiles on their websites. And in addition to that, I mean, the National Geographic programs, it's very competitive now. It wasn't quite as competitive when I first got my grant back. I think it was 7 years ago now. But they look at kind of the whole package, and it really benefits you if you have some support from either teachers or professors of some kind to show that you've, looked at it holistically and that you have good support with you intellectually.
Yeah. Their website really is incredible. So National Geographic grants, they lay out absolutely everything. They're always changing the things that they're looking to highlight. So do check that website out. In Canada too, we have Royal Canadian Geographical Society, which is much smaller in scale, but they have some really cool grants as well. Both of which just got announced actually in the last couple of weeks, which is pretty exciting. So do check those out too.
And the Explorers Club also, the Discovery grants.
Now.
Yeah, check them out. I'm trying to think if there's any others that I can think of. If I can think of anything else, others, I'll let you guys know.
Perfect. And we're going to follow up with all the classes that registered with an email. So you've passed along so much information. We want to make sure that have that also. Explorers Club, National Geographic, all those things in place.
Yeah.
One last question time for Miss Kameli's class in Newmarket. If you have one, just unmute your mic and you're good to go. Hey, Ms. Kameli.
Hey there, thank you. So the question that we have is sort of what type of, like, if you could choose one piece of technology that you think is most vital to the work that you do?
Great question. I kind of mentioned this in the presentation, but I really think it sounds silly because I know our phones are so basic, but my cell phone is so much for me in the field. And like I said, because I do a lot of interview-based work, I use my recordings on my phone. So I record all of the interviews, and then I code those in qualitative software when I come back, if like in Vivo or some of these different software where you can actually analyze your data, which in my case is interview information. So I use it for that. I use it for GPS, navigating around places. I have to say, I used to do a lot more photography, but the cameras have gotten so good on iPhones and smartphones that I have not been using my DSLR or my nicer cameras in the last few years. I use my phone. So I have to say my phone has really, for my particular line of work, has become one of the most important for kind of keeping notes. I use my note function. I know that's probably not the answer you were maybe hoping for, but I have to say that's probably the most valuable piece and a notebook. I do still like a good notebook for any other, just writing down when your phone's dead, whatever it may be.
No, I love that answer. And I think it's really important to note for kids that want to be explorers in their future. And I mean, we've already had a question about grants, that it's not like you need to be someone equipped with the greatest, gear. You can go out with a phone, with a notebook, and make some real amazing discoveries and do some really incredible work like you've had the chance to do.
And there's such great apps now. I mean, I know iNaturalist, there's so many different programs that allow you to explore using your phone and get engaged using your phone. So I mean, on the one hand, I almost hesitate to say that because I'm one of those people that's trying to use my phone less. I find that I'm so attached to it, and I know that it can be a crutch. But there are a lot of benefits, certainly in my life right now, to being able to have all of that kind of on one device. The other thing I'll just mention that's become, I don't use it all that much, but GIS and using different software systems for mapping and understanding layers of data and information particularly in geography, like those are tools that a lot of my colleagues use for a lot of their research as well.
Yeah. Very, very cool. I'm glad you mentioned iNaturalist. We mentioned that a couple times today. Our Backyard Bio program coming in is going to really heavily feature that, which is really exciting. So many things you can do with that. This has been a really, really fun presentation. I wish we could talk for 2 hours, but we're already rebels going to a full hour, so good for us. I do want to stress a few things. If you want to learn more about Alizé's work, so she's got an amazing website. All the links to her social media platforms are there. All the cool work that she's doing is coming out. If you want to see more of Modern Explorer, do check this out below. We've also linked this into the chat and YouTube, and I will send it to all our registered groups. Again, over 250 kids today. One thing that you might cover in your documentary, but just in the off chance you don't, I want to stress for kids. You mentioned Ladakh earlier in the presentation.
Yes.
Check out ice stupas. For any of the kids in the program, if the National Geographic did an article on this, it's one of the coolest things I've ever seen in National Geographic. Ice stupas.
So I'm so glad you brought that up, Jesse. That is one of the 4 episodes.
Excellent.
Of the
I'm so
adaptation
excited.
series. So I traveled to go tell a story about the ice stupas, and that will be part of the series that's coming out probably this fall in September. So yes, keep it. The adaptation series that I mentioned at the beginning is very much, that is exactly what we cover. So check it out.
Fantastic. Glad a little bit of a spoiler for classes there. For the Endurance Expedition, this book is the greatest book ever. It's the greatest exploration book of all time. I'm going to take a few seconds just to nerd out about this. There's 2 other things that I wanted to mention in this. When they're in their little rickety boat trying to get to South Georgia, there's a moment where they think there's a break in the clouds, but it's actually a wave that like blots out the sun. That's like they think is over 100 feet high, which is amazing. And all the guys on Elephant Island, you talked about keeping up morale and how important that was for Shackleton to do that. His second in command back on Elephant Island every day would pack his bags and wait on the shore as if they were going to arrive and come back and save them. Right. And all the other crew were like, why are you doing this? That's crazy. And like, he's like, nope, we're going to like get ready here, keep a positive attitude. And every single member survived, which is super cool. All in that book, all in the Alizé series. So do check that out.
Thanks for bringing that up, Jesse. That's so wonderful.
It's such a cool program, and I'm so glad kids get the chance to see it. I mean, you've mentioned this series, Crash Course, all these incredible things that students can check out. Is there any last message you want to wrap with before we say goodbye for the day with our teachers?
No, I'm so impressed with all the teachers. Keep up the incredible work, and students too. I know it's not easy right now in this virtual format, but I hope that some of the stuff that I've been able to talk about today can be of use for all of you. And if you want to reach out to me, please feel free on Instagram, Twitter. I'm just at Alizé Carrère for both of those, and I love being in touch with people. So you're more than welcome to send me a message, and I will gladly chat with you. So please reach out. I'm very much available for any discussions.
And the rest of your day is going to be taken up with answering those questions that you just listed. So good luck with that. Thank you so much for joining us as always. Such a pleasure. And as you know, what we do at the end of every broadcast, I'm going to bring in our teachers running away with their classes. So Mr. Atkinson, Mr. Gerard, Mr. Atkinson, Ms. Camelli, welcome.